So, if you're Catholic, you've probably heard of the Rosary. And even if you're not Catholic, you might have heard of the Rosary. So what's the big deal about it? I mean, why do Catholics talk about it all the time? The truth is, the Rosary is the most powerful weapon in the world. And that's not according to me. That's according to like a bunch of saints. Saints, you know, super holy people, spiritual masters of fighting evil. So probably should listen to them. If you want a good example of the power of the Rosary, look up the true story of the Battle of Lepanto. The Battle of Lepanto was a true historical naval battle that took place on October 7th, 1571. And it wasn't just any naval battle. It was one of the largest, if not the largest naval battles in history. On the one side, you had the Ottoman Empire, the Turks. And on the other side, you had what was called the Holy League, a bunch of Catholic countries united together and bankrolled by the Pope. Yeah, the Pope financed the war. This was the 1500s, and things were a little bit different back then. So you had the Holy League, Christendom, on one side, and you had the Ottoman Empire, the Turks, on the other. And the Turks definitely had the advantage, at least numbers-wise. It's estimated that they went into the battle with about 278 ships, while the Christians, on the other hand, only had about 212. That's like 66 ships less, which in naval battles is a pretty big deal. Soldiers-wise, the Turks had 31,490 soldiers, while the Christians, on the other hand, only had about 28,500. The Turks also had 50,000 sailors and oarsmen, while the Christians only had about 40,000. So numbers-wise, the Turks definitely had the advantage. One advantage the Christians did have was they had more guns on their ships. Even though they had 66 less ships, they had roughly about twice as many guns. It's estimated they had about 1,850 guns in total, while the Turks only had about 750 guns. So, who had the advantage overall? I mean, what's more important in naval battles? Number of ships and soldiers, or number of guns? Honestly, I don't know. I'm not an expert in naval battles. But from all the reading I did when I was researching this, it seems that most people are in agreement that the Turks definitely had the advantage. So I guess number of ships is more important than guns. So leading up to the battle, things were looking a bit dicey for Christendom, to say the least. In fact, things were looking so bad that the Pope, which was Pope Pius V, who later became Saint Pius V, so a pretty good dude. Well, what he does is he orders all of the churches, day and night, to be opened in Rome. And not only that, he also tells all Catholics, and here's the key, to pray the Rosary for victory. So what happens? Well, at first, the wind was against the Christians, which is a pretty big deal in naval battles because, you know, sails. And actually, it looked like the Turkish armada was going to be able to make contact with the Christian ships before the Christians could even line up in battle formation. I mean, the Christians are scrambling, fighting against the wind. They can't get their ships in line like they're supposed to. And meanwhile, the Turks are just like, chugga chugga, the pain trains are coming. Only it wasn't chugga chugga because they didn't have steam powered. They had, you know, sails. But right before the two sides meet, the wind changes in the complete opposite direction. All of a sudden, the Christians have the wind at their backs, and the Turks are like, wind to the face. So what happens? The Christians are quickly able to get in battle formation, line up, and then just plow the faces of the Ottoman Empire. By the end of the battle, the Holy League loses roughly 10,000 men and 13 ships, while the Ottoman Empire, on the other hand, loses about 40,000 men and 230 ships. The Christians absolutely curb stomped them. The Ottoman Empire is defeated, Europe is defended, and Pope Pius V credits Mary and especially the praying of the Rosary. In fact, he names October 7th to be the Feast of Our Lady of Victory. And that's a feast that we still celebrate today, only we changed the name somewhere down the line to Our Lady of the Rosary. But still, same feast, same prayer. Now I can tell you some of the reasons why I didn't used to pray the Rosary. In fact, I hated praying the Rosary. It was boring, it felt repetitive, it was just not my type of thing. It wasn't my prayer, you know? In fact, when I was studying to be a priest, I still didn't like praying the Rosary. I know, someone's studying to be a Catholic priest, and they don't like to pray the Rosary. But this older priest, who was like a spiritual mentor, told me to start praying the Rosary every day. And I said, I was like, it's It's not my thing. And he was like, that's nice. Pray the rosary every day. To be honest, it was really hard at first. Like, for all the reasons that I mentioned. It was boring. It was repetitive. I didn't get much out of it, or I felt like I didn't get much out of it. But that was my problem. See, because I didn't feel much, I didn't think it was doing much, which is completely wrong. And I realized that because I stuck with it, and I stuck with it for 6 months, every day, praying a prayer that was boring and repetitive. That was tough. But after 6 months, I noticed a change. And it wasn't really something that I can really explain very well into words, but it was like it just clicked. I felt a difference in my life. I definitely felt much closer to God and definitely much closer to Mary. There was a lot of fruit that wasn't feeling like, the angels coming out and blowing the trumpets or anything like that, but it was like there was just a lot more life or strength there that I didn't really have before. And I knew it was because I'd been praying the rosary every day. So why pray the rosary? Because it works. It works incredibly well. You just have to put in the work and the effort beforehand before you're going to start seeing some of that fruit. And it's not just my experience. Listen to the experience of some of the most holy and spiritually powerful people who have ever lived. The saints. First, you have Saint Dominic. Saint Dominic was the one that the Blessed Mother gave the rosary to begin with. Saint Dominic was living in southern France in the 1200s, so like 800 years ago. I know, a really, really long time ago. Anyway, he's living in southern France, and Dominic, he was facing a problem. Actually, the whole church was facing a problem, and that problem was the Albigensians. The Albigensians were a group that was teaching some pretty serious heresy, some pretty weird stuff. One of the things they taught was that there isn't actually one God. There's two gods. There's the good God, which we hear about in the Bible, but then there's an evil God, and that's who Satan actually is. Not only that, but the evil God, Satan, is in charge of all the physical stuff, and the good God, the one we hear about in the Bible, is in charge of the spiritual stuff. And so everything that's spiritual is good and holy, and everything that's physical, like our bodies or like everything you see, that's actually evil and bad. And the problem with this is that it's completely ridiculous and stupid. I mean, God didn't just make the spiritual stuff. God made the physical stuff as well. And if we remember in Genesis, he says that it's good, it's good, it's good. And then finally on the sixth day, when he creates humanity, including our bodies, he says it's very good. The truth is, the physical is good too. Well, the Albigensians didn't get that. In fact, some of the stuff that they taught was that our ultimate goal in life was for our soul, which is spiritual and good, to escape from our evil, bad body. That's the goal. And so some of the things they would say is that suicide is actually good because it allows the soul to escape from this prison of a body. Yeah, really weird stuff. But there was a problem. A lot of people were listening to them. Like a lot. And St. Dominic's job was to preach and try to convince people that this stuff was crazy and weird and to stop listening to the freaking Albigensians because they're nuttier than a payday candy bar. But there was another problem. Old Dominic, he wasn't having much success. I mean, he would preach and preach and preach, and St. Dominic was a very good preacher. But people just weren't listening. So one day, he's praying and he asks Mary for help. And she appears to him in a vision. And what she tells him is to have people start praying her Psalter. What the heck is that? The Psalter is a fancy name for the book of the Psalms in the Bible. It's basically just a collection of all the Psalms in the Old Testament. All 150 of them. That's right. There's 150 Psalms in the Old Testament. And monks, they used to pray all 150 Psalms every day. That's right. 150 Psalms recited every single day in Latin. Well, as you can imagine, some monks had a really hard time with this. I mean, some monks are really bad at Latin. So they came up with an easier version for these guys. Instead of 150 Psalms every day, they would pray 150 Our Fathers, and they would keep track using beads of 50. Pray 3 of those, and you get 150. Well, it wasn't long before some people decided to start doing this instead of with Our Fathers in honor of Mary. So they would pray 150 Hail Marys. This became known as Mary's Psalter, a way of praying 150 psalms, but in honor of Mary. So when Mary tells St. Dominic to have people start praying her Psalter, he knows that this is the practice that she's talking about. And then to help with that, she gives Dominic 15 mysteries to have people meditate on, with 10 beads, 10 Hail Marys, per mystery. So you have the 5 joyful mysteries, 50 beads, the 5 sorrowful mysteries, 50 beads, and the 5 glorious mysteries, 50 beads. 50, 50, 50, 150 in total. The luminous mysteries, for those of you who've heard of them, they don't get added on till much, much later. Well, anyway, so you have the joyful, the sorrowful, and the glorious. What was the point of these mysteries? Well, they were events in Jesus' life that people are supposed to think about when they pray this prayer, but they're the events that the Albigensians were denying actually happened. So St. Dominic takes this prayer, the Rosary, and he starts teaching people how to pray it. So, did it work? Well, how many Albigensians have you met? Another saint who loved the Rosary, and he came about 300 years after St. Dominic, was St. Louis de Montfort. He said, quote, "The Rosary is the most powerful weapon." That's a pretty sweet title, the most powerful weapon. He also said that no one who prays their Rosary every day will be led astray. This is a statement I would gladly sign in my blood. I mean, that dude was not messing around. Never be led astray, and signed in his blood, and he's a saint. That's awesome. Another saint who emphasized the power of the Rosary was Saint Pio of Pietrelcina, aka Padre Pio. Now, for those of you who don't know, Padre Pio was freaking awesome. And he's pretty recent too. He only died in 1968. Why was Padre Pio so cool? Well, he was super holy. But also, he's kind of like the grand master of weird spiritual saint stuff. I mean, it's like he came on the scene and God said, boom, you get all the gifts. Padre Pio had the stigmata, which means he miraculously had the same wounds in his hands and in his feet that Christ did on the cross. There's also reports of Padre Pio bilocating, meaning being seen at 2 separate places at the same time. He also reportedly could read souls in the confessional, so no hiding your sins from him. In other words, this was a dude who really was attuned to the spiritual life. Maybe we should hear what he says about the Rosary. He said, quote, "The Rosary is the weapon for these times." Notice, he's calling it the weapon. That's spiritual warfare talk right there. And Padre Pio is someone who would know. But notice also the emphasis on the particular times that we're living in. You know, this is a guy who only died in 1968. He's not talking about the 2nd century. He's not talking about the Middle Ages. He's talking about us here and now. And he says the Rosary is the weapon for us now. Finally, there's another guy we should mention. Not a saint, but a blessed. Blessed Bartolo Longo. St. John Paul II called him the Apostle of the Rosary. But he wasn't always a good guy. In fact, old Barty was at one time a satanic priest. That's right, he was a devil worshiper. And not just any old devil worshiper, he was a priest in Satanism. I'm not exactly sure what someone has to do to get that title, but it's definitely something not good. But the point is, he actually later converted, coming back to his Catholic faith. In fact, he even became a blessed because of, you guessed it, the Rosary. After his conversion, spreading the Rosary became his mission in life. He said, "Whoever spreads the Rosary is saved." Clearly, this is a guy who knows how evil works, someone who was deeply entrenched in evil, in Satanism. And it tells us something, that the prayer he runs to after his conversion is the Rosary. Like, if this dude says it's powerful, it's kind of like he would know. Thanks for watching, guys. Like, share, subscribe, and don't forget to pray your Rosary. See ya.